there's lots of interesting, exciting things going on in the kind of digital heritage space. I think there's some really interesting kind of aspects around data, access to content, the kind of growth of aggregators, the development of systems. All of these I think really interesting. I think also as well some interesting technological developments which are finding their way into digital cultural heritage and digital heritage. So I think that's kind of really exciting. And the workshop that we've been to here has brought up lots and lots of aspects that are very relevant at the moment. Things like involving the stakeholders, collaboration, access to different forms of content, annotation, getting users involved, along with things like access and accessibility, really important issues. And these are the issues that we're facing at the moment. I think, a number of things to consider. I think one thing is to keep it simple. You're serving a very diverse user base, and very similar to maybe systems such as Europeana, serving a massive user base, a very diverse user base, lots and lots of potential uses of the content, repurposing of the content, lots of people potentially accessing the portal for all sorts of different reasons. But I think you've got to keep it simple. So keep it simple for the providers, the publishers, keep it simple for the end users, keep it simple for the librarians and the digital libraries. So that's certainly one thing I would bear in mind. So I think in terms of advice, other things I would say is you're growing at a phenomenal rate at the moment in terms of the content that you're ingesting and the users and the potential kind of growth of users and user groups. So I think, thinking about scalability, how are you going to scale up the services that you have? Maybe thinking about the Europeana model where they provide an API that people can then build their own applications, do their own things, access the content in their own ways. That definitely is probably a way to be going in terms of scaling up and providing for a very diverse kind of user need. So I guess my own work kind of around digital heritage has mainly been on kind of access to cultural heritage and digital cultural heritage, and been involved in quite a few projects with museums, archives, kind of libraries as well, looking at how to support particularly search and discovery. So my kind of interest really is around information retrieval, around search technology, and how search technology can aid people and support people in the kind of various tasks that they're trying to fulfill. And there's lots of areas going on in the moment in that field, so supporting users for exploration as opposed to just kind of looking for known items or specific items, personalization, recommendation, kind of helping people kind of with their broader tasks as well. So it might be that you're trying to support a scholar, so therefore you might want to think about what's their process that they're going through, their workflow, that kind of bigger picture. So I think all of those are kind of areas that are very much being talked about at the moment. Kind of other areas would be use of technology, so mobile, delivering stuff on mobile, conversation, and how you might have dialogues with systems. That's definitely going to be maybe a part of the future. So there's some of the areas. I guess other work that I've done has been around evaluation. And that's really important. How do you know your systems are any good from the perspective of many stakeholders? What's the value add of a service like the National Digital Library of India? And how are you going to measure that? What's the success criteria going to be for all your stakeholders, end users and providers and so on? So they're definitely areas that I think would be worthy of further investigation. Yeah, so I think success is hard. I think success is, you've got to first of all, I think about who are you trying to measure success for. Then you've got to think about, how are you going to measure success, what criteria you're going to use, what measures you're going to use, what methods would you use. And a lot of the work in my own area is really focused on certainly the kind of search and search output with respect to kind of an input. But on many systems, including your own digital library system, it consists of many components. So do you test each component? Do you test it as a whole? Do you use just kind of usage as a measure of engagement? There's kind of lots of things, user satisfaction, gathering user feedback can all be used to kind of guide success. In terms of, what criteria, what would actually be a success criteria? Hard to say, but a lot of times it may be things like user satisfaction. It may be engagement, which you might measure through, how long people are spending on the sites. It could be through, repeat visits, how many people are coming back again, those types of things. All of those could be kind of indicators of success. So I think probably thinking about things like your users, so who are the users, and maybe carrying out various user studies to better understand the user, the search context, and so on would be really valuable. I think that would be really, really helpful. Often it's talked about, knowing your user and designing for the user. So I think that's something to do, and that includes also monitoring as well. So it might be monitoring through kind of web analytics or search analytics, and looking at changes over time. I think my own experience has been often sort of taking academic research into practice can be quite hard. So even things like deciding how you evaluate the systems, there's a lot of academic literature, but it can be quite hard then to actually kind of transfer that to practice. But I think you're going to have to do that and think about that. I guess things like, so from my own experience, we built a system where we had people who could create their own kind of pathways through the content, their own kind of collections and so on. So I think all of that type of feature would be useful and could benefit the users, particularly in a kind of collaborative group setting. So it might be students could form groups and so on and share resources. So these kind of additional features on top to enrich the service, I think, would be definitely something that could be beneficial. If an API hasn't already been created and is publicly available, I think there's lots of evidence to show that would be a good thing. So the stories of Europeana and other people who, having done that, you allow people to reuse the content however they want. But of course, then you've got to think about, if you're going to be providing that, the scalable issues, and so on. There's lots of stuff to think about. And I guess, just probably looking at the kind of wider literature on interfaces and user interfaces. So to me at the moment, what's being presented is quite like a traditional library catalogue. And, the world is kind of moving in other directions partly in terms of how to interact and engage with these types of systems. So I think, that might be an area that you'll look at in the future. And that would include things like, multilingual search, supporting users across different groups, age ranges, levels of expertise, experience, and so on. And so I think, my first impressions are incredible job, really well done in terms of what you've been able to achieve with the resources. Not only that, having kind of government support as well is really, really admirable. That's been fantastic. I think lots of interesting content, really good ideas going into it. Technical development looks good. You have an operating platform. And I think it will be just a challenge is now of taking it to the next level. And obviously that's fantastic you got the funding, and it'll be exciting to see what comes from that. It does look perhaps quite traditional in the sense of it looks like many other library catalogues, and it might be in the future kind of thinking outside of that box and trying to think about more of the users and their needs and their scenarios and how can you support them. So maybe even developing sort of tools, features that support the learning process. For example, would be valuable additions. I think the multilingual support, and we've touched on some of that at the workshop, will be really, really valuable because I think your user group, the demographic is diverse in terms of culture and language, and that will be important. Together then with making use of kind of things like analytics, search analytics, web analytics, really to kind of monitor the system, but also look for improvements as well. And there are improvements you can do certainly on the search front, so you can improve the search quality through kind of re-ranking search results. And again, once you start getting enough users, enough data, that's the sort of thing that would be possible. As well, I think at the moment the service seems very good, seems stable. I think there could be improvements in terms of maybe how people search. So at the moment there's a very traditional kind of white search box, type your query here, and that can be quite daunting for a lot of users, especially if you're not quite sure what you're looking for. You can browse, you have the browsable categories, but when you use them, again, there's a bit of a vocabulary gap in the sense of you kind of need to know really if you're looking for a specific topic, what's the kind of categories that it might fall within. So certainly there are some kind of probably basic principles on the interface that could come from the current literature and what we know about kind of good design principles that could be fed in. But those are kind of minor compared to what's been achieved, which is getting a system up and running, which is great.